Welcome to a new season of Around the Table with Stacey Smith. Today we're going to talk about politics. This year, of course, is an off-year election, but that does not mean that politics has taken a back seat. In fact, there is a lot happening behind the scenes as far as people and parties jockeying for position for next year's midterm elections. So it's time to talk about politics and go around the table. And now we're going to meet our analysts. First, we're going to introduce you to Governor Tom Corbett. He was a former governor of Pennsylvania, served one term. He also served as state attorney general and as the U.S. attorney for the Western District of Pennsylvania. Mr. Corbett right now practices law in Pittsburgh and teaches law at Duquesne University. Across the table from the governor is a former foe. That would be Jim Byrne. Jim served as the state Democratic Party chairman about the same time that Mr. Corbett was in office as governor. Jim also served as president of the Allegheny County Council and as mayor of Millvale. And right now, Jim practices law here in the city of Pittsburgh. He is not an attorney and does not play one on television, but he can craft an argument as well as just about any attorney. As we go back around the table with the Republican side, we find Keith Schmidt. Keith's political background dates all the way back to the Reagan campaigns, but he really became immersed in politics when he was the state director for former Pennsylvania Republican Senator Rick Santorum. Keith also worked on Santorum's 2012 presidential campaign. Keith right now has his own consulting firm in the city of Pittsburgh. And now we go back around the table to the Democratic side and we meet the great philosopher, as I like to call him. That would be Joe Mistick. Joe is well-versed, especially in Democratic politics across the state. And he also served as deputy mayor for the city of Pittsburgh. He's worked on several campaigns across the state. Joe right now practices law in the city of Pittsburgh and also teaches law at Duquesne University. Gentlemen, welcome back to Around the Table with Stacey Smith. Glad to have you back for this new season and a lot to talk about. The first thing we're going to talk about, of course, today would be the upcoming election in the city of Pittsburgh, and that would be the mayor's race. So the question is I have for anyone who wants to take it on, does anyone think that Tony Moreno, the former Democrat who turned Republican as a write-in candidate to take on Ed Gainey, the Democratic nominee, does he stand a chance at all?
I do not believe so. Tony Moreno is running under the Republican mantra. He's not a Republican. Hell, if he was a Republican, it was 80 years since a Republican has been successful in the city of Pittsburgh. The dynamics of Allegheny County have changed like the rest of the country, but the dynamics of urban politics have pretty much stayed the same. It's a deeply entrenched Democratic machine. If anything, the movement in the city of Pittsburgh is with the progressive wing of the party, and Ed Gainey is attached to that wing of the party. So if anybody is up and coming, it's the progressive movement. The progressive supported Mr. Gainey in the spring. I believe they'll come home in the fall. And anybody that tells you that there's going to be any kind of race this November, especially now that there was a businessman, a black businessman who was considering an independent run, that fell by the wayside. The way it's set up now, it's just that dog don't hunt. There is no race in the fall. Ed Gainey is our next mayor.
Well, you know, I think if we've learned anything in the last few years, it's never say never. There have been so many things that we said that were never going to happen in politics that have happened. In fact, Ed Gainey's victory over an incumbent mayor, the first since 1932. Pretty amazing stuff. Now, Ed Gainey's taken this race very seriously. He's campaigning very hard. He's out every day, meeting with various different community groups, neighborhood groups. And, you know, he's not taking anything for granted. And Mr. Moreno is mounting a campaign as well. You know, he has some help from the Republican Party in Allegheny County. But, you know, is it a long and hard slog for him? Well, yes, it is because of the registration numbers. But one thing we have to factor in here, and I'm not sure, and I've not found any of my friends are in the business who are sure, what the impact will be on the fact that there's no more straight party voting. You know, that's just, I can't wait to find out, frankly, so we can factor it into future elections. But that's a different factor here.
The fact that Mr. Moreno worked hard in the spring, it showed he had some decent numbers. But let's not forget that many of us on this panel in the primary would not have been surprised if Ed Gainey beat Bill Peduto. We knew how horribly he was doing in polling. We all agreed that based on the attacks the incumbent mayor was putting on his challenger, Ed Gainey, signaled that he was in trouble. So when Ed Gainey won, as historic as it was, most of us, I think all of us here, weren't necessarily surprised. I do agree with Keith, and coming out in this new season, out of the gate agreeing with Keith, what kind of year is it going to be? But Keith is right. This is going to be, this is Ed Gainey's. Now, tactically, I don't understand why Tony Moreno, if he wanted to have a shot, did what he did in August. And by way of background, he secured enough Republican write-ins that he could seek the Republican nomination. So he, in fact, did that. Bill Peduto had enough as well. If Moreno had refused it, theoretically, Peduto could have went for it and been on the ballot as a Republican, but that's another story. All he needed to do as a Democrat, all he needed to do was file the paperwork, pay the nominal assessment, and then Democrat Moreno is on as a Republican nominee. Moreno switched his party. He switched it to Republican. I suspect he did that in exchange for the support of Sam DeMarco, the GOP chair, and others in the GOP. By doing that, he contradicted much of the disavowalment of the GOP that he was getting heat for in the spring. So to the extent he was hoping to get any Democratic support for those who may not have been Gainey supporters, he squandered that. So this is Ed Gainey's. Ed Gainey is at first and goal with 4 quarters to play. He can fall backwards into the end zone. He will be the mayor of Pittsburgh.
Governor.
Yeah, I don't see a fumble coming on this. It would be pretty hard for him to lose this one. And there are other races that are out there that really don't have an impact on this race. I mean, Ed Gainey, I agree with everybody else. He's going to win this race. Then the challenge comes. Then the work comes. Because, he's going to be picking up the reins from a mayor who had a different style when it came to governing. And it'll be interesting to see what now will soon be a former state representative, what his style of governing is. Because that is, and the gentleman on the line with me also, that is completely different governing than it is campaigning and being the executive as it is being the legislative. A lot more duties assigned to you, a lot more expectations assigned to you. And I would hope Mr. Gainey would understand that in addition to being the mayor, he's like he and Rich Fitzgerald are 2 of the leaders of Southwestern Pennsylvania. And when you're trying to attract businesses to Southwestern Pennsylvania from around the country, around the world, those businesses are also going to be looking at who the leaders are. And they have to represent not the Democrat Party, not the Republican Party, but the people of Southwestern Pennsylvania.
I'd like to throw this out for you guys in just a quick discussion if we can. And that is it healthy for this city or the county or any particular jurisdiction to basically have one party in control that's always going to be elected, that we don't really have a 2-party race? Is it?
We don't have one party in control because the Democrats are not one party. The Democrats are at any given time 4 or 5 different factions of running under the Democratic banner, but comprised of different people with different philosophies, different beliefs, and they go after each other hammer and tong in every primary. I mean, if we were one party, Bill Peduto would have been renominated by the Democrats. It's another Democratic Party that made that race competitive and beat the incumbent.
I agree with you 100%. When you have one party in control, they got to fight somebody. They divide amongst themselves, which has happened with the progressives and the regular Democrats in the city of Pittsburgh. But make no mistake to your viewers, the Republicans nationally is no different than it is in Pennsylvania. We are the minority party. When we have an opportunity to win races, the way we win races is by swing Democrats. And although we've had success in Allegheny County, it's because 900,000 people in our county live outside the city. Only 300,000 live in the city. There are swing Democrats in the county that give us the opportunity to win the races. I would say if you look at a protracted list of candidates for the last 40 years I've been in politics, there's literally no swing in the city when it comes to those people. You'll come out of a deficit in the city and you try to make it up in the suburbs around Allegheny County. So for that reason, the fact that it lacks swing Democrats basically assures Ed Gainey's success.
I used to give the speech when I was state chairman about the diversity of the Democratic Party, and as important as that is, the paradox of a party that welcomes all ideas, the paradox of a party that brings everybody to the table, is the risk of the divisiveness that can bring, especially in a contested primary. And that is where Republicans, who, as Keith indicates, are nationally and locally in the minority, find their advantage with swing Democrats, and oftentimes Democrats who may have been disenfranchised, who felt as if they got a wrong deal when they came to that diversified table, didn't get what they wanted, or their candidate lost. So the important thing for the party has always been, look, the celebration of our diversity is that we have that conversation with each other, then unify behind whomever gets selected. That on paper is the speech we give. The reality, as Keith indicates, is people go away with hurt feelings. People think they got a raw deal. Maybe they didn't like the negative attack. And that's where the GOP can find and pick off disenfranchised Democrats, or, as Keith indicated, swing Democrats who may not be on the platform of the eventual Democratic nominee. That's how they win.
We have a long history of factionalism. You can go back to David L. Lawrence versus the prothonotary Roberts. You can go back to Tom Forster versus Dick Caligiuri, Tom Forster versus Sophie Maslow. We have these splits in the party, which are essentially different parties. I mean, different political organizations. And that's what keeps the political scene alive here. We don't get as much action from the Republicans as perhaps they would like, but boy, they're cagey and wily, and they find ways to win.
Cagey and wily. All right. Let's move on to another topic, and that is last year, 2020, was a census year. And when the new census are taken every decade, that means the states have to start to redistrict not only the congressional districts, but also the state house and the state senate races, or districts, I should say. So all of the state house is up for re-election. Half of the state senate is up for re-election. The new districts for the state are going to be determined by a legislative reapportionment committee, which consists of 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans from the legislature, and a fifth person, and that's former Pitt Chancellor Mark Nordenberg. They will decide the state house and the state senate districts. Should we expect any fireworks out of this at all?
It gets the most exciting form of politics, the most exciting political arena for those of us who've played in that arena. 10 years ago, I was counsel to the House Democrats during reapportionment. But for much of the public, it's a snoozer. I mean, this is not the kind of thing that people hang on every bit of news to come out of Harrisburg. But it's vitally important. So this year, I think that, will there be fireworks? Yeah, but it'll probably be a small private fireworks show that just a few of us will be interested in watching.
Well, but it's also, Joe, and I think you'll agree with me on this, that it's one place where leadership in the House and the Senate of the different parties have the ability to influence their members to fall in line, for want of a better description. Because as that line is being drawn, you could be carved right out of that district that you used to have if you really tick those off. So that's the capital P and small p of politics. On the congressional side, it's a little bit different because frankly, the congressmen all put their weight in. They all say where they want their districts to go. But Stacey, as I think we're going to lose a congressman this year with the reduction in the population in Pennsylvania. So the drawing of those lines is going to be vastly different than what it was 10 years ago. And 10 years ago, if I recall correctly, we had lost the congressman also. What was interesting in that one, and that got overturned by the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania, was that Republicans and Democrats agreed in the Congress, these are the lines they wanted. They sat down and picked out the lines. I signed the legislation, and then it gets overturned by various court cases that were brought against those lines as they were drawn by the party leaders.
Interestingly enough, Stacy, I think you remember you and I had a recent conversation about redistricting, and I mentioned to you that redistricting is the last bastion of inside politics in America. You know, there in a coffee shops and bars, believe it or not, we're involved in everything. We have opinions on everything, but for some odd reason, people don't engage in redistricting. Maybe they don't understand it. Maybe they think it's above their pay grade, but it's really still a backroom politics, deal cutting affair, where it's really the inside baseball of politics. This might be the last thing that really is inside baseball. And as a result of that, it is more difficult for both parties to engage their electorate to the judge races, because that's the important part of the process. Judges are more and more involved in this process, and they want their constituents to vote accordingly. But because they're not involved in redistricting, they don't have a complete appreciation for how important the courts are, excuse me. And to the court's point, as I look back in history on the court's activity, courts were the final option of last resort. Now, in recent years, you see the courts more and more playing a role in this decision making, and called more activist courts, which are dangerous on both sides of the aisle. There's a lot of evidence through the years that courts actually sent the decision back to the legislature and said, it's not our role, it's your role, figure it out. Multiple times they would send it back. Now they see themselves as part of this process. And that's why with an activist court, you know, the posturing of the behind the scene deals changed completely if your party has control of the Supreme Court. And that's not only true in Pennsylvania, that's true across the nation.
I've spoken on that. I think we all have spoken on that to our respective parties at one point or another about the significance of the courts as the last line of defense or the last line to review these if the legislature can't work them out. I recall 10 years ago, the GOP, who controlled both the Supreme Court and the chambers in Pennsylvania, took a map up that was so bad that the conservative state Supreme Court sent it back down and said, do it again. And the argument on the second round was, this one isn't as bad as the first one. Well, you know, that one was the one, Keith, you know, that's the one that passed.
I remember.
At the beginning of this show, Stacy, you referenced this cycle as an off-year election. If I were still the state chairman, I would be going across the state right now, like I did before I left office in 2015, saying there is no such thing as an off-year election. In 2015, when I handed the gavel over, I spoke about the importance of these quote-unquote off-year elections being on year because of the courts. The state party did a judicial sweep in 2015. 3 Supreme Court seats, 1 Commonwealth, 1 Superior. And people are reminded to this day of some of the decisions they have had to make because the conservative legislature couldn't work it out, and they followed the law and they made the decisions which we thought were fair and equitable. So that is what the GOP is saying to their judicial candidates and to their supporters. That's what the Democrats are saying to theirs about the significance of having the right people on the bench to make the right decisions, to follow the law accordingly.
All right, let me jump in here. We were talking about the state House and state Senate races. We've jumped into the congressional races. So let me just ask this particular question. Of course, the congressional races, the districts, I should say, are set up by the state legislature. That's by law. Also, now the governor has to sign off on what the legislature comes up with. The legislature right now is controlled by both houses are controlled by the Republican Party, I should say. The governor is a Democrat. So will we be seeing a congressional map that everybody agrees on, do you guys think? Or is it going to be one of those deals, what you've just been talking about, is going to be headed back to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court?
Well, from my perspective,
Good, Governor.
from my perspective, you know, the legislature, that's their job. The governor basically says they've approved it. I've approved the legislation that they have created. You know, I don't know what Governor Wolf is going to do. I don't know what other governors did, but I didn't see it was my role to redesign or say, no, I don't like the boundaries that you created for the congressman. And the fact is, the congressmen all had a role in creating what the districts were. So I would be disappointed, frankly, if Governor Wolf said, I don't like what you wrote, I'm vetoing it, do it again.
Yeah, the Republican map is is really drawn by the Republican National Committee, and the Democratic map is drawn by the Democratic National Committee. And then those are presented to the respective caucuses in the legislature, because the national committees really understand it better than anyone. They have the experts and the knowledge to draw districts that are favorable. The other little secret in reapportionment is that your biggest obstacles are oftentimes your own members. You could create perhaps several more districts that are better for your party if some of your members were willing to give up a little bit, allow you to shave some Democratic votes off their districts perhaps, and still keep them strong. But boy, they fight you hard to keep that from happening. So incumbency is also recognized as one of the big elements in reapportionment.
And I think the Republicans, although they're squarely in charge in both chambers and will remain so after this upcoming next year's election, they have to be cognizant of the fact that the sitting governor is a lame duck governor who really only has one more budget to negotiate. So if he wants to play hardball, he's probably in the point of his term that he can play hardball. So I would say that they're going to be cognizant of the fact that the governor's in a little bit more of a negotiating position. He can take a stand and hold to it. So I think they're going to look at that before they draw a very partisan map to put on his desk.
Let me jump in now. The governor brought this up a moment ago, and that is the state of Pennsylvania, while it did grow in population, it is still losing in congressional seat. So we have 18 congressmen right now, congressmen and women, 9 Republicans, 9 Democrats. It's going down to 17. How do you guys think it's going to set up? Are we going to see one, which party is going to be favored in the redrawing of these maps?
I think the reduction, well, they'll follow the population. I recall the governor and Keith commenting on that in a prior season of this show, that the population will determine where the lines are drawn and where the reduction would be made. And therefore, obviously, since the population reduction is here in Western Pennsylvania, I think none of us will be surprised to see the seats here on the I-79 corridor that are currently held by Republican Kelly and Democrat Connor Lamb being the ones that in all likelihood would be merged. And that speaks a lot, in my opinion, as to why Connor Lamb has jumped into this race for US Senate. He must see the inevitability of this district being merged, which will make it very difficult for a Democrat. Once you get up above Allegheny County and take the 79 corridor until you get to the county of Erie, it performs very red, it's registered very red. Mike Kelly cannot be beat up there currently. You merge all that red with a little bit of blue down in Connor Lamb's seat in Western PA, that becomes a favorable Republican congressional seat. So that's how I see it. Either Connor Lamb knew because discussions have begun, or he saw the writing on the wall based on the trending and he made the leap that he made.
Yeah, there are some comparisons to.
Apparently, we're having an issue with Keith at this moment. So
Congressman Reggie Knight, it was a new trick that he had to raise.
all right, now we got you back, Keith.
You have me back?
Yeah.
To go back to it, I said Connor Lamb is in the same situation in many ways that Senator Santorum faced in 1994 when he was a congressman and opted to run for United States Senate, because the map that he was handed 2 years earlier put him in a very, very difficult Democratic district. And the only reason he survived re-election is 8 or 9 people ended up running in the primary against him, and we got the desired candidate to face off against the fall. And he mentioned to me in a recent conversation, he's not surprised at all that with Connor likely being put in a district where he has to run against another tougher district, this makes sense for him with the large he got nationally on his victory in the congressional seat, that this would be the time to launch a Senate campaign. So I agree with my friend, Mr. Byrne, wholeheartedly. So that's 2 for 2 today.
What's happening to this program? I don't know.
We're through the rabbit hole.
But we're practical with this. That's what all This is the way it is. It's not far right. It's not far left. This is the way it is.
The
All right,
governor
well-
and I are gonna have to mix it up now to liven this show
Yeah,
up.
I know.
You're right down the hall from me at the moment.
Yeah.
Let's move on then, since you brought up the Senate race and Connor Lamb deciding to go for that. According to Axios, it's reporting that on the Republican side, Jobs for Our Futures PAC has spent $166,000 already to run ads against Sean Parnell in favor of Jeff Bartos. Governor, what's happening here already? I mean, is this the thing we were talking about before, that there's just infighting within the party?
Well, I mean, there's always, it's a primary at this point in time. And a candidate from the East, Jeff Bartos, candidate from the West, Sean Parnell, they're each out there. I mean, I get fundraising requests from everybody all the time. This is nothing different. What's different is some of these independent groups are kind of weighing in on behalf of one candidate or another. You're going to see the same thing. I think you're seeing the same thing, and Jim, correct me if I'm wrong, that's going on the Democrat side as to who the candidates are going to be. It's far from determined at this point. The same thing with the governor's race on the Republican side. I think the governor's race on the Democrat side, that's over already.
Yeah. You're seeing direct attacks in the Republican primary for U.S. Senate already. A little early, but yeah, it's a primary. It is what it is.
It's almost
The
October.
the Democratic side, you have the candidates that are in so far. They're still building their armies. They're still looking for commitments. They're looking for endorsements. They're raising money. They're building their camps. Once we start to see who stays in and who may get out and cut a deal, then you'll start to see them gearing up to go after each other. I would suspect by the time we get to the state committee's February meeting, you'll start to have a good idea of who's for real and who's pretend. And then you'll start to see the cannons turning towards each other and going more aggressive towards each other ahead of the primary. But it is an inevitability. And what the chairmen of both parties are probably warning the candidates right now is, do the best you can with this primary process. You bloody up one of the other folks too hard and they end up winning. It's the party Miranda rights. Everything you said and did against your opponent will be used against him by the Republicans in the fall. So
Well,
they
just-
have to be really
Right.
careful.
Just to let you know, I mean, you're not escaping this on the Democratic side. Axios also reporting collective super PAC. I'm not quite sure which candidate they support or whether they're just opposed to Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman, but they're running some ads and have spent $110,000 already against the Lieutenant Governor, who says he's raised more money than everybody else.
You know, neither
Yes,
Parnell
super
nor Fetterman are the ideal candidates for their parties. And yeah, there must be some polling data out there that the party leaders are looking at that indicates that, if one of these guys wins the primary, we're going to have trouble in the general.
Yeah, if these
So-
PACs had $1 million or $2 or $3 million in them, they'd get my attention. The fact that the one has 166,000 and the one has 110 is almost the equivalent of having nothing. I mean, in the end, the Democratic nominee for United States Senate in Pennsylvania and the Republican nominee for United States Senate will spend each between 60 and 100 million dollars for that seat. So when you look at PACs that are spending or at least raised like 100,000 or a little over 100, it's not even a bleep on the radar at this point.
Right. According to Axios, this is what they spent already. It's not what they've raised, but I have no idea how much money they have raised. I want to move on. We just are about out of time here, and maybe I shouldn't be doing this, but how important to the Biden presidency are the votes that are coming up on the $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill and the $3.5 trillion Build Back Better plan that the president has?
He needs a break. He needs to change the narrative sooner rather than later. He's had a real bad couple of months here. And he needs to do something here to change the conversation from the criticisms he's been getting into something positive. There's a real risk right now when the progressive wing of the party is insisting on this reconciliation, all or nothing, and outright defying Speaker Pelosi, that it's right now, it's legitimately, there is some risk to it. So he needs to find a way to get this done and get this through so he can change this narrative off of some of the things he's been getting criticized for and show a historic bipartisan piece of legislation that his predecessor could not get through, even though he had campaigned on it, specifically infrastructure.
We only have about 30 seconds left, so who wants to jump in?
I would say he needs a win. Without a doubt, he needs a win. To me, infrastructure, construction, transportation, that's the win. To go for, what is it, almost $4 trillion of spending is not going to be a win to Republicans or Democrats that are out there having their taxes raised.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us this morning. Once again, on Around the Table with Stacey Smith. Our topic was politics. We'll start this all over again because the good thing about politics is it always changes and there's always something to talk about. See you next time, guys.
Thanks, Stacy.
Thank you.
Good to be back.
Good to be with you.